Thank you and welcome to this session. This session is about the year of election, the year 25. That has been a year full of elections. The last one was a few days ago in Romania. There has been all over the world. More than 2 billion people voted this year. And of course, as now is possible, in most of these elections, there has been interference coming from the social media and the internet world. So we are now in this session trying to discuss what happened in this various experience. We cherry picked some European experience, the US experience with Benjamin that is with us, and the African experience with Filile that is with us that you cannot see but is there somewhere. So what is the assumption of this session? The assumption of this session is there has been measures that has been taken in certain part of the world, in Europe for instance, but also in other parts of the world, trying to tackle disinformation and to prevent the impact of disinformation on elections, on electoral processes. And the idea is today to see how this regulation has worked, if it has not worked, which were the problems that they encounter, etc., etc. So the European model is probably the most complex and more articulate. I would like to ask Alberto Rabachin from the European Commission to start and to explain us how this model works. He has some slides, he can originate the slides. But before to give the floor to him, I want to thank you, Paula, that is moderating with me from remote, and Eric, that has the difficult task to make the relation about all the various dots that will be conducted today in order to make a report from the session. Thank you. Alberto, can you take the floor and can you start with your slides?
Yes, thank you very much, Giacomo. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me share a few slides that I have prepared for this session.
Sì, ti sentiamo, Alberto. Non vediamo ancora le tue slides.
They should be coming.
Okay. Something happened? Yes.
Now I will make them full screen.
Perfect.
Okay. Very good. So, as I said, thank you very much for inviting me to present what is the framework that the Commission has in order, the European Commission has in order to safeguard the electoral process. As Giacomo said, it's a quite complex mechanism, which is composed by several elements. I'm going to give you an overview of the elements that are very much related to the work that I do. Of course, there are also other activities made by other parts of the Commission that are relevant. So it was a year of election, in particular in Europe. We had the European election, we had several parliament election at national level. So it was an intense year. And as Giacomo said, and as probably you are all aware, the new digital ecosystem poses new challenges also to democracy and also in particular to the electoral process. That's why the Commission has adopted a quite complex ecosystem of rules and initiatives. But first of all, it's also important to acknowledge that this problem, the problem of disinformation and election integrity is a problem that many European citizens, 38%, see as a very serious threat, a very serious problem. So 38% of Europeans consider that disinformation poses a serious threat to democracy. That's also why we are doing what we are doing. It's not just an initiative of the Commission, it's really a need coming from the citizen. And which are the pillars of this framework? Well, there is, of course, a new regulation, the Digital Services Act, that it's the first global standard for preventing illegal and harmful activity online. So this cover not only illegal activities but also harmful activities, and we will see later how. We have a self-regulatory regime, which is an agreement at industrial level that major online platforms have taken together with other relevant actors to limit the impact of disinformation. We have then a bottom-up initiative, which is the European Digital Media Observatory, that is financed by the European Commission, that puts together relevant actors that fight disinformation on a daily basis. We are talking about researchers, fact-checker, media literacy practitioner, and other relevant stakeholders. And the new entry, which is not, it's an act that has been voted but is not yet fully implemented, is the political advertisement regulation that regulates political advertisement online. So the Digital Services Act, as I said, the Digital Services Act of course, targets illegal content, but for the first time also we have regulation that targets harmful content, which include disinformation. And for this, we have obligation for very large online platforms. Very large online platforms are platforms that have more than 45 million users in Europe. This obligation oblige very large online platform, very large search engine to put in place a risk assessment and risk mitigation measure to tackle specific risks. And how it is related to election, this Digital Services Act. Of course, as we said at the beginning, as Giacomo has introduced the session, the social media and in general online platform also poses a risk to civic discourse and electoral process. Therefore, this risk needs to be addressed, and mitigation measure needs to be implemented by very large online platform and very large online service. In preparation of the European election and also of the national election, the Commission has run a roundtable which have put together, national authority, major online platforms, but also key stakeholders that all together discuss the risk related to the electoral process. The Commission has also, ahead of the European election, issued electoral guidelines on the mitigation and systemic risk for elections. So this is what was done basically in 2024. And these guidelines are very important because they include a recommendation for very large online platforms, very large search engines. And these recommendations, are basically coming from best practices that have been observed to mitigate risk and the integrity of electoral process. So what are these type of recommendations? For instance, to provide user with contextual information like fact-checking labels if they are used by the systems. Reducing the prominence of disinformation, provide information about, the electoral process, and very important, demonetizing disinformation. We know that, a lot of malicious actors use disinformation to have a financial gain. And a big threat, in particular ahead of the European election, was perceived like for AI-generated content, so deepfakes. I'm sure that the other speaker will dig in this matter later. So this was basically the legal framework that obliged platform to take risk mitigation measure. As I said, there is also a self-regulatory framework under the Code of Practice of Disinformation that is basically an agreement among industry giants and other key actors to act in order to limit disinformation. There is a quite wide set of commitment and measure included in the code that address specific issues related to disinformation, like demonetization, transparency of political advertising, reducing manipulative behavior, increase user empowerment, enable fact-checking, and also there is a lot of transparency around the functioning of this code. There is also a permanent task force, which is composed of all signatories that almost on a weekly basis discuss the implementation of the code. Here you have a list of the signatory. Of course, here we have key platform like Google, Meta, Microsoft, and TikTok, and trade organizations that represent also the sector. Twitter, or now X, was a former signatory, but he decided to leave the code after the new ownership came into place. What was done in particular under the code to protect the election? The rapid response system was activated. It was a system that basically put in direct contact fact checkers, civil society organizations, signatory of the code, with a very large online platform and very large online search engine signatory of the code. This system allowed to allow fact checker and CSO to flag content that was considered dangerous for the electoral process. On their side, platform were committed to analyze the flags and decide on the basis of their term of services if an action need to be taken. This system was activated for the European election, for the French election, and for the Romanian election. Now, and there was also a similar mechanism that was put in place on Moldovan election. I'm basically going towards the end of my presentation. Just wanted to have a focus on the Romanian election. We know that they have been very difficult. There was a lot of foreign interference on this election, and this was shown also by the number of flags that the rapid response system had seen, with more than 1,000 flags exchanged coming from civil society organization and fact checker and going to the major platforms.
Alberto.
Yes, I'm concluding because
Okay.
very quickly I mentioned the European Digital Media Observatory. This is a bottom-up initiative financed by the Commission. We have put more than 30 million euros on this initiative. It has 14 hubs, and he has a system of monitoring disinformation across the EU and doing investigation. I'm sure that Giovanni will give you all the details on this. I will stop here and happy to take any question if you need.
Thank you very much. The question will be eventually at the end because now we are very tight. So Giovanni, you have been asked to continue and to complement the picture.
Yes, thank you, Alberto. I'll try and share my screen because I have my presentation there, and so we'll have a couple of seconds of embarrassed silence.
Something
Okay.
is happening.
Something's happening.
Yes, that's
I
magic.
hope so. Okay, that's great. So I present. Good afternoon. It is great for me to present our work with the European Digital Media Observatory in such an important venue as the 2024 Internet Governance Forum. My time is short, so I will dive right in. First of all, I would like to present a couple of key pieces of information about the observatory, which is usually known through its acronym EDMO. Alberto mentioned it briefly, so since I have a couple of minutes more, I'll try to present it. The observatory was established in 2020 as a project co-funded by the European Union. Its core consortium is composed of universities, research centers, fact-checkers, technology companies, and media literacy experts. Beside the coordinating core, there are currently 14 hubs connected to EDMO, covering sometimes just one country and sometimes a larger area in Europe. The concept behind the hubs is to cover the variety of languages and the specificity of media landscapes across the Union, since the challenges posed by disinformation are clearly very different from Slovakia to Portugal and from Finland to Greece. The general scope of EDMO is to obtain a comprehensive coverage of the European media ecosystem, mainly with regards to disinformation and all the connected issues, and to propose, as well as enact, new and effective strategies, hopefully, to tackle them. For the broadness of its scope and its multi-stakeholder approach, it is a unique experience in the European landscape for its ability to carry out many different efforts, such as 1. To monitor disinformation across the continent through a network of 50 plus fact-checking organizations working together on a regular basis in monthly briefs and investigations. 2. To provide analysis and suggestions in the policy area with a special focus on the code of practice on disinformation that was mentioned by Alberto right before. 3. To coordinate and to promote media literacy activities, such as the one that I'll present in a minute. And 4. To contribute to research landscape, to the research landscape in the field, with a special effort in promoting data access to researchers. But on this we have a class here which will tell us more in a minute. Let's try and be very practical and specific about what we have done and what we are currently doing. I will give only a couple of examples of the many activities we are carrying out, and I invite you to visit our website edmo.eu to know more. First example. Ahead of the 2024 European elections, we decided to set up a task force specifically to monitor the media ecosystem and to provide insight, analysis and action around the issue of disinformation. As part of this effort, we set up a daily newsletter that, thanks to the hubs and the day-to-day work of fact-checkers in the field, updated policymakers, journalists and experts about the main disinformation narratives and the most important issues of the day, providing a connecting work which is usually made difficult at the European level, for example because of the great linguistic variety of Europe. Let me show you an issue I selected almost randomly. This is the issue number 46 on June 10, 2024. It had three main items, one about how disinformation tried to exploit problems with polling stations in Spain on election day, as detected by Spanish fact-checkers. Another one about how a top Swedish candidate's campaign was likely boosted by coordinated behaviors by X accounts, and it was done linking a Swedish report in the newsletter. And a third one about the rise of disinformation targeting the 2024 Paris Olympics, which was spotted by the big French newswire agency AFP and its Factuel department. At the same time, we publish reports and weekly insights about the main trends in disinformation in Europe, and we promoted a Europe-wide media literacy effort with the hashtag #BeElectionSmart. The #BeElectionSmart campaign was an EDMO initiative to support citizens in finding reliable information about the elections and recognizing false or manipulative content ahead of the elections themselves. Each Monday from the 29th of April to June 3rd, 2024, a new message along with the practical tips was published on the websites and social media accounts of all 14 EDMO hubs covering all EU member states. Most of the activities were new ideas and never tried out at the European scale. And some of these activities turned out to be successful pilot projects that we have since adapted to new scenarios. For example, the Romanian elections that were mentioned before of late November 2024 made headlines in Europe and beyond when a previously little-known candidate was able to finish first in the popular vote. Citing foreign interference and tampering with the regularity of the electoral campaign, on December 6, 2024, the country's constitutional court annulled the results and ordered for the first turn of the elections to be held again. Drawing from a pilot during the last few weeks before the EU elections in June that Alberto mentioned, in the context of the Romanian elections, we activated a rapid response system mechanism through which members of the EDMO community can proactively flag to very large online platforms suspicious and troublesome cases. It is then up to the platforms to take action or not according to their terms of service. Moreover, on the EDMO website, we translated and made available to the community at least 3 analyses of the role of social media on the Romanian elections. Just yesterday, we made progress in an effort to provide a technological tool based on AI, which is currently in its testing phase, to Romanian fact-checkers, a tool which is apparently quite good at spotting networks of social media accounts, carrying on coordinated campaigns of dissemination of suspicion content. This is the result of cooperation between many actors, researchers involved in developing the tool, which are part of the EDMO community, the Bulgarian-Romanian Observatories of Digital Media, or BROD, which is one of the most active regional hubs in the EDMO ecosystem, and EDMO EU acting as coordinator and facilitator of these exchanges. It is tiresome, intensive, but also very rewarding work. And let me conclude with some actionable advice if this short presentation gave you some food for thought. First, disinformation is an issue that naturally crosses disciplines and fields. It is crucial to build a multidisciplinary network of practitioners. Second, it is also necessary to find means to connect those practitioners. If not a big and expensive project as EDMO, then just a newsletter or a comms group or an app. 3. To help you communicate the results and attract new forces for your effort, you will need to produce an easy readable, easy shareable outputs. There are many for EDMO, and you can find all of them on the edmo.eu website. Finally, I will invite you to get in contact with us at EDMO to know more about our experience, our difficulties, our few successes, and many challenges. We are very happy to share what we know and to learn about what we do not. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Giovanni.
Thank you.
I hand
indeed,
over
Giovanni.
to Paola, please.
Thank you indeed, Giovanni, for sharing the work that we are doing at EDMO. I think you did a very impressive presentation of the work we did, and I like how you concluded. We are trying to learn, but we are open to learn even more, and that's why events like today are actually very important also to learn from other experiences. But now I would like to give the floor to Delphine Goulart. She is the spokesperson at the European Parliament, and she will tell us what the European Parliament actually did, because as you know, in June we had the EU elections, and that was quite an important moment for the Parliament. So the floor is yours, Delphine.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to join you remotely and to talk here today. Indeed, the Parliament has been active in this area since 2015. As co-legislator, it has been pushing forward the legislations that my colleague from the Commission outlined, legislations to protect citizens from detrimental and harmful effects of the internet, but also promoting freedom of speech and ensuring consumers have access to trustworthy information. This was at the core of the priorities during the past legislature, and it will remain at the core in the next legislature that just started. And if we take stock now of the European elections that took place last June, well, the European elections are conducted hand in hand with the 27 EU member states. The European Parliament was adding a layer, deploying a go-to-vote campaign to mobilize as many people as possible by showing the added value of European democracy. And an important part of this democracy campaign, of this communication strategy, was to counter and prevent disinformation from harming the electoral process. And the idea was to anticipate potential disruption that could be expected in connection with the European elections. And we cooperated in this end with the other EU institutions, from the colleagues of the Commission that you just heard, the European member states in a rapid alert system, and the fact-checking community to get a complete picture. And I have to say the in-depth analysis that was provided throughout the period by the European Digital Media Observatory that we just heard, Giovanni, was really, really worthwhile. This was instrumental to have this whole of society approach. From our internal analysis in the Parliament of national elections in the member states, we knew that we could expect attempts to try and sow distrust in their electoral processes, alleging that elections are fraudulent or rigged, or spreading false voting instructions, or sowing polarization, especially around controversial topics. So what we wanted is to make sure that European citizens were exposed to factual and trustworthy information. So to empower them to recognize the signs of disinformation and also to give them some tools to tackle it. So we were inspired by many good practices in the different member states. And with the similar example that we had from Estonia and the Nordic countries, we set up a website about the European elections, explaining the technicalities of the elections. I hope you see the slide, because I don't.
Yes, we
the
can see.
measures, perfect. The measures put in place by the European member states were explained, and it explained also at length how the EU ensured free and fair elections. So the idea of the website was to inform about the different aspects of election integrity, from information manipulation to data security. So the website was also equipping voters with tools how to tackle disinformation. This is one example. But of course, what we did also is we developed a series of pre-bunking videos explaining how to avoid common disinformation techniques. So, for example, taking advantage of strong emotions to manipulate, or polarizing attempts, or flooding the information attempts with contradictory version of the same event. And thanks to the External Action Service or partners in foreign policy, the videos were also available in non-EU languages, including Ukrainian, Chinese, Arabic, and Russian. And I think I have a short version that we can show for 40 seconds now.
Thank you.
And it's coming.
Disinformation can be a threat to our democracy. People who want to manipulate us with disinformation often use content with strong emotions such as anger, fear, or excitement. When we feel strong emotions, we are more likely to hit the like or share button without checking if the content is true. By doing this, we help spread disinformation to our friends and families. What can you do? Watch out for very emotional content, such as sensational headlines, strong language, and dramatic pictures. Question what you see and read before you share. Things you would question if somebody told you face to face, you should also question online. Take a step back, pause, and resist the reflex to react without thinking.
So you see, this was an example. So this is what went throughout the period before the elections. And it was shared via social media and TikTok. And in addition, we organized briefings, workshops for civil society organizations, for youth, for educators, for journalists, for content creators. The idea there was really to engage different audiences, providing really tips and tricks on how to detect and avoid disinformation techniques. So it was also reaching out our members in the European Parliament with a specific guide. And one element we are particularly proud is establishing contact with several youngsters across Europe, especially first-time voters, via Euroscola and what we call the European Parliament's Ambassador School program. Those are flagship programs of the Parliament for students. Because, you know, raising awareness of the threat is a key and long-lasting solution that requires the implication of the society as a whole, and it starts with education. These were two examples, or three examples. One element that I want to highlight is also the importance we pushed on having strong relationships with private entities, civil society organizations to convey the importance of voting. And this was spread as widely as possible. So it was tech companies, other companies, as the Code of Practice also mentioned, it was instrumental to have them on board. I want to mention the importance of strong, independent, pluralistic media that were instrumental in this fight. During the legislature, there were several legislations that were passed at European level, the European Media Freedom Act, or a directive to protect journalists against abusive lawsuits. And we tried also to support media in their work, from briefings, invitations, or grants. I don't know, we saw a lot of things during the last elections, maybe not the tsunami that we potentially feared, but there was an increase of information manipulation attempts targeting the European elections. Until now, we have not detected any that seemed capable of seriously distorting the conduct of these elections. And this is an assessment that we have shared with the EU institutions, the other EU institutions, and the European Digital Media Observatory. Giovanni can of course give you more information if you need. But we have to remain vigilant beyond the elections and continue the European elections, continue monitoring, because the effect of disinformation is not a one-off. It's not only during the European elections or those big moments. It's a slow dripping that hollows out the stone. Look at what recently happened with the Romanian elections. It's something where the parliament is scrutinizing really at the moment and asking information about to the Commission. This legislature, we see that the parliament is very eager to have more information. They have passed several legislations to call for step up in this area, stepping up efforts. There will be, that's a new dimension for this week, there will be a special committee that will focus on the European Democracy Shield. It's really to assess existing and planned legislations related to the protection of democracy. They are also asking to deal with the question of addictive designs in social media platforms. So there is a lot of activity, and next week in the plenary there will be 2 debates specifically on disinformation, especially disinformation during electoral period. Maybe to conclude, as Giovanni did, with some learnings, 3 main of our end. Information manipulators really see elections as an opportunity to advance their own goals by smearing leaders, exploit existing political issues, sow distrust, erode the credibility in the democratic system and its institution. Second, good intentions and voluntary actions are not enough. Legislations and regulations play an instrumental part, so Parliament has been and will remain a key actor there as co-legislator to shape laws that are fit for the digital age. And third, at the same as Giovanni already underlined, it is really important to continue to implement a whole of society approach, learning from each other's practices and programs to double our efforts to make society more resistant to destabilization attempts. So this was a bit what we want to transmit for the European Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Delphine. And indeed, as you said, maybe there wasn't that tsunami, but as you rightly underlined, and as we also underlined as EDMO, disinformation is rather a drop after drop. So we cannot just focus on it ahead of the elections, but it's rather a longer process. And I think that right after these 2 presentations, I mean, there are so many keywords: media, journalism, fact-checking, media literacy, emotions, addictive design, media literacy, digital platforms, and so on. So you understand why the whole of society approach, but also why the multidisciplinary approach. For example, if we know that emotions play a certain role, that's thanks to a specific research in the field. If we know about fact-checking, it's another field of research. So that's why institutions like EDMO, in collaboration with other organizations like the Parliament, the Commission, but platforms as well, and civil society organizations and so on, are so important. And now, I mean, after this lots of words about the EU, we thought that maybe it would be interesting also to focus on other parts of the world, because as we were saying, this was a year of elections actually in the whole globe. And so I'm very happy to give it over to Benjamin Schulz from American Sunlight, who will focus on the US. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Paula. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. If it wants to go. Okay, I think it looks like that was a success. Can everyone see?
Yes.
Okay, lovely. Well, thank you all very much. It's wonderful to be here speaking with such a geographically and in so many other ways diverse crowd from all over the world, different backgrounds, you know, all here to talk about disinformation and how do we make the internet a better, safer place. So thank you for having me. Obviously, in the US, we just had an election. I think, you know, putting it bluntly, I think it's a result that surprised a lot of people. And, you know, really this year of elections in the States was kind of a weird one. In many ways, we kind of regressed, and I'm going to explain this a bit further on into my 7 or 8 minutes, but this is just a taste of what's to come. But we're in a very different place in the States than we were 4 years ago and even 8 years ago in terms of taking action on disinformation, in terms of platforms playing an active role in content moderation, trust, and safety across the board. We've seen things regress, which I think is the direct opposite to how things have gone in Europe. And so it's a very interesting phenomenon taking place. So with that, I will jump on into the slides here. So this GIF, this is one of my favorite GIFs. And I think it actually really accurately, despite it being funny, really accurately describes the current US approach to disinformation and online harms of all kinds. Whack-a-troll is what we at the American Sunlight Project call it. That's a play on whack-a-mole. And as you can see, the cat is just trying to tap the fingers as they're popping up. And as the cat tries to tap them, they go away. And the cat continues to do this for as long as I have this slide up here. And I think, again, this sums up where we're at. In the last year, really 2 years, we have seen platforms pretty much just give up entirely. And this is not specific to any particular platform, although I will say that some certainly are doing more giving up than others. For lack of or for not wanting to sort of impugn anyone's integrity, I won't name that platform, but I think we can all take a guess. And this is really problematic because we have seen a massive proliferation of hate speech, of false information of all kinds, from false polling place locations to attacks against elected officials, doxing, things like this. This has become commonplace in the States in the last year or two. We've seen polarization reach really unprecedented levels, political polarization. And the political system is about as toxic as it's been, certainly in my lifetime. And even though that's, anecdotal and qualitative, it has certainly become worse in the last couple of years. This has been buoyed by the rise of the far right in the States. There's been a significant populist turn, as there has been in many other countries in the world. And we've seen platforms sort of go along with this, which I think is very different than how things have played out in Europe. In the States, we do not have regulation such as the Digital Services Act or really anything of the sort. And platforms, as you can see just from these headlines, have surrendered and given up. Termination of trust and safety teams has taken place. And we've also seen the rise of a narrative of censorship from the far right primarily, also limited sections of the far left, but really the political fringe on both sides have started to claim that any content moderation, any action against false and malicious claims is tantamount to censorship. In the States, of course, we have the First Amendment, which protects the right to freedom of speech and expression and assembly. And this is, of course, a very American right. This is something that I think every single American supports, the right to freely express yourself. But where we're seeing some conflict politically in the States and with platforms in the government and the incoming administration is sort of where that right, where the boundary is, right? For instance, in the States right now, my organization, the American Sunlight Project, we just released a new report just last week, impacting how malicious, sexually explicit deepfakes have actually affected members of Congress. What we found was 1 in 6 women in Congress in the States are subject currently right now on the internet to sexually explicit deepfakes. And what we've seen is the Senate has passed bills already that would regulate these deepfakes and make it a criminal offense to spread them non-consensually because you're using someone's likeness to denigrate them and portray them as being in pornographic material. But we've seen pushback in the House from the far right, who claims that this is a violation of free speech. So this is kind of the situation in the States right now, and I just want to preface everything that I've said here is not me taking a position one way or another, just sort of painting a picture of where we're at in the States. And so, sorry, I should have skipped ahead a little bit earlier on the slide here, but we've seen this kind of democratization in the most kind of extreme way of artificial intelligence, deepfake technology, but also other types of malicious text-based content too, that we've found plenty of evidence of foreign bot networks that have played a significant role on various social media platforms in this election cycle. To the extent they changed voting behavior, I think that's really kind of impossible to measure. But certainly we have plenty of evidence, and not just us, but pretty much every organization working in this field in the States, that this type of content has been pervasive and getting into people's feeds, whether it's on TikTok or X or Facebook or Instagram or whatever. We've seen that algorithms, just as my European colleagues just mentioned, content that is emotional or gets people riled up, makes them want to click more and scroll more. Algorithms favor this kind of content. And we've certainly seen plenty of malicious, fake, and actually also illegal content making their way into people's feeds. So again, to the extent that changed voting behavior, not sure. But certainly people have been increasingly exposed to false and malicious content in this election cycle. Going back to the deepfake issue, and not just in terms of deepfake sexually explicit material or image-based deepfakes, but we've seen numerous instances in the States of actually election officials and even Joe Biden himself being spoofed and imitated by deepfakes. And again, in the States right now, just to paint the picture, again, without taking a political position, just accurately describing where we're at, a lot of this material, it's completely legal to make and create and disperse. Now, in this headline, the third one on the right here, New Hampshire officials investigate robocalls, etc. There was a criminal investigation here because it's illegal to sort of interfere this blatantly in an election. But there's plenty of other instances which haven't been prosecuted of this type of behavior happening, and this is incredibly damaging. And again, in the States, we have pretty much zero regulation on deepfakes, on really any kind of election-based integrity measures. We have pretty much none, which again is pretty much in direct opposite to how Europe has approached this issue. I think certainly in the States, our institutions are structured differently. I think it's much harder for us to implement these kinds of measures, the DSA, GDPR, etc. But nonetheless, this really just highlights the issue.
Thank you, Benjamin. Can you go to a close, please?
Yes, we'll close it up. So one thing, I'll wrap it up very quickly. Kamala Harris ran for president in 2020. Again, not getting political, but she has pretty much been the most attacked person in terms of gender and identity in the last really 4 to 5 years in the States. Numerous studies, actually one study that my boss authored found that of all gender and identity-based attacks against any politician in the United States, Kamala Harris received roughly 80% of those attacks. And this really just, again, going back to the polarization, the toxicity of the American political system, this highlights that. And it makes it incredibly difficult to, get people to agree on a set of regulations, a set of rules for technologies, for platforms, et cetera. And so with that, I will wrap it up and say that for the immediate term, the outlook in the States is not so good. And hopefully we get through this tough period and are able to, sort of be united as Europe has been on this issue, and improve our feeds, improve our political system, and go from there. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. As we are running a little late, I will give it immediately to Pilile Ntombela from Africa Czech. We are moving again geographically. Pilile, the floor is yours.
Good day, everybody. I'm going to just quickly share my screen as well, and then I'll get started if it does actually share. Can you see my screen at all?
Not yet.
Okay.
Now, yes.
You can see it now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Amazing. Okay, great. So I'm just going to quickly go full screen and then hope for the best. Great. Okay, first and foremost, thank you for having me. My name is Pilile Ntombela. I'm a researcher at the South Africa office of Africa Czech. Africa Czech is the continent's first independent fact-checking organization, and we have offices in South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, and Senegal. So first and foremost, I'm sure everybody in the room is aware, but we often like to share that misinformation, shared by well-meaning people who are trying to inform you and have no idea that the information is false, while disinformation obviously is shared with an intent to mislead. has a goal in mind, often a political one, and the people share know that the information is false. So patterns across the continent this year that we've seen through the election year, we found that targeting journalists and the judiciary and all these other bodies was a very powerful tactic. We found that journalists were accused of bias whenever they tried to fact check. So we had something called the Elections Coalition in South Africa, which included journalists and media houses who would either try and do a quick fact check themselves. So we trained them beforehand as part of our organization's training systems, or we helped them to fact check. And often they were accused of bias whenever they fact checked a specific politician and told that they support their opposition. We had rumors of electoral bodies favoring parties. A certain party in South Africa actually took our independent electoral commission to the Constitutional Court, which is the highest court in our country, stating that they felt they were being marginalized and also they were being basically receiving unfair treatment. Of course, the Constitutional Court ruled against that because it wasn't actually true. It was more publicity stunt to make people both wonder whether the Constitutional Court is independent and if the Electoral Commission is. And so this is the last part, which again leads back to the court case with the Constitutional Court. We found that people are more connected, but voters are still vulnerable to false information. Media literacy is not ubiquitous. A lot of people don't have it. News media is increasingly putting important information behind paywalls, and in a continent like ours, which has a huge amount of economic inequality and poverty, this is very difficult for people then to overcome those. Language remains a barrier. Africa has, I think, about more than 2,000 languages across 53 states, and those are the ones that are deemed official languages. Sorry, let me go back here quickly. As the news media as well. But on top of being connected, we found a report by the International Telecommunications Union, which showed that Africa is still, even in 2022, Africa still suffered from what we call the digital divide. We had the lowest level of people that had internet connectivity, which means those people then, whatever information they receive, they don't have the opportunity to look it up or double check it or send it to a fact-checking organization like Africa Check, which means that these issues then remain a problem. Finally, we had platform accountability. We found that, especially on YouTube, I don't know if I'm supposed to mention them, but some platforms, people were able to share their information unchecked, disinformation unchecked. One of the platforms obviously will put a note with a sort of miniature fact check, but doesn't actually curb the spread of that same content or the same posts that show disinformation. We are part of the Meta third-party fact-checking program, and so in that side, we found that we actually we're able to kind of help the spread, because when we add a fact check, it downgrades the post or even removes it. However, there's still far more to be done on social media, particularly in places where, just like I said, in Africa, it's very difficult for people to access that information in other ways. So if I find that there's information that is incorrect, but I believe it and I share it and I send it to somebody who has no way of finding out if it's important, if it's true, then you'll find that then that information spreads even faster. And platforms, obviously, their algorithms definitely need to be able to pick up common phrases used for disinformation, particularly in election years, but in general overall. The biggest disinformation this year was fraud allegations, particularly in South Africa. Claims of vote spreading were by far the worst. A specific politician started these, knowing that he's a very charismatic character, but also has had a lot of problems with legally and also with the IEC. So of course, started the issue saying that the vote would be rigged even before the election season started even the year before. The media then they just shared it with a parroting fashion. They'd just not actually fact check it or even try to say, this person said. It was more just shared verbatim to what he said. This then trended on social media, and this is some of the examples. So I'm assuming it's but on my left, you have a report by a nationwide newspaper, which then took that statement made by the politician and just made this the headline, which of course then drives the idea rather than creating a sense of this is what somebody said. On the right, the conspiracy was then named the big lie, and we found that between 25 May to June, this cloud was basically, it took over social media, with the biggest the biggest causes being the ones in purple, and then later the ones in the turquoise.
Filile,
So,
sorry,
yes.
we are long. Could you go to a close because we have the last speaker waiting, and the next
Okay, sure.
session starting soon. Thank you very much.
Okay, sure. Then I'll just speak on go past all of these, and I'll speak about our stance on anti-information regulation. We found that in Africa, the backfire can be quite damaging. So it can be used to stifle and, stifle people, censorship. And also people can turn to covert means, for example, using platforms like WhatsApp, which have end-to-end encryption, and then we won't have access to them. And also runs the risk of penalizing misinformation instead of disinformation. So we've decided to have a combined accord, which was created this year at the AfriFX Summit. 50 fact-checking organizations in more than 30 countries, basically reaching offline and vulnerable communities, expanding access to reliable information, protecting fact-checkers from facing harassment, and collaborating with tech partners to innovate. This then, for us, was more a collaborative space rather than legislative or legal space, and that is all I have to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Filile. Sorry for that. The last speaker now is Klaas. Please, Klaas.
Yes, so I suggest something radical, seeing that we have taken a lot of time and the next session is beginning soon. So I'm Claes de Vries, I work at the University of Amsterdam, a member of the executive board of EDMO, and I was going to talk about a specific risk, but from a broad perspective around generative AI and elections in 2024. Let me just give you my take-home message rather than going through the whole presentation at this point of the panel. I think we are somewhere between relief and high alert. So if you look across elections of 2024, it will be hard to identify a AI-generated risk that really flipped elections in the last days of the election. So on the one hand, you could say that was a big relief because that's very different from the expectations going into 2024, when there were true and genuine fears about elections being overturned through generative AI. That didn't happen. At the same time, all the evidence, and that's the evidence that would be in the slides that I will then skip, there's also not been a single election in 2024 worldwide where generative AI and AI-generated material has not played a role. And I think that's the take-home message really of this discussion on AI, that there is a certain sense of relief that 2024 did not become the absolute catastrophic year where there was an absence still of regulations in this area and a technology that was available and that was deployed, but maybe not with the detrimental effects that were expected in 2024. Does that mean that the AI discussion is over as we move into a big election year in 2025? Absolutely not. It's important to look at the impact of generative AI, and EDMO will continue to doing so also in 2025 as we see elections that take place in that year. It's important to not only look at persuasion of voters, but to see what kind of role AI is playing in the entire ecosystem of elections, whether that is in the donation phase, whether that is in the mobilization phase, whether it is spreading disinformation about your political opponents, and whether or not it is igniting and fueling into already existing conflict lines and emotions that are taking place in particular elections in society. So let that be the take-home message for 2025, that while 2024 did not become the AI catastrophe, which was in many ways predicted by a lot of observers also in this space, I believe that as we move into 2025, there's all the reason for an observatory like EDMO to continue the work to see how these technologies are being deployed across elections, and this is something that we should do collaboratively also with centers and researchers and civil society from outside of the European Union to really get a better grasp on the impact of AI on elections.
Thank you very much, class. Thank you for sacrificing your time. Um, just one question to the two non-European speakers. Do you think that Filile and Ben, that if you have a legislative framework like in Europe, this would make your life easier or not?
Okay, I'll go first. So for us, no, it wouldn't. For the reasons I mentioned in the presentation, there's a huge history of censorship, suppression, and once you create a law like that, unfortunately, because everything works with precedent, once one person is able to use that law to manipulate people that are actually trying to spread proper information, it can go wrong in so many ways. And so this is why we came up with that declaration at the Africa Facts Network. 30 fact-checking organizations around the, 50 actually around the continent, then all said, proved that, well, signed up to say that they'd rather we collaborate, including with responsive governments, so that we can try and fight disinformation and misinformation from, a media literacy perspective and outreach perspective and an international, but still within the continent perspective rather than laws because of how they can be manipulated, as we've seen with other laws in our countries already.
Thank you. Ben, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think yes, actually, I think it would help us in the States. I think, implementing something like totally identical to like the DSA or the any general law regulating platforms, I think that would be difficult to like legally deal with. I think it would face a lot of kind of chopping down. But particularly around protection of researchers, data access for researchers, these things I think would be extremely helpful and would enable civil society to, do what we were doing in 2020, which was analyzing content from platforms and reporting on online harms, which we can't do today.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to the people in the room for the patience. Apologies to the next speakers of the next session. We are hand over to them, and sorry for not taking question, but we will be outside the room if you need help and you have to raise any point. Thank you.